Hey everybody, welcome to week 7, and this is our theme this week. And again, this week, I want to offer a very short lecture, and I want you to really get into the reading. Now, you have the chapter from the text to read on recruitment, chapter 6. So I also gave you a whole bunch of supplementary readings. Most of the articles are not that long. So take a look at those. But what I'm really interested in is you looking at the various websites which purport to be hiring sites for government and nonprofit. So these are the sites that these kinds of organizations use when they are recruiting and trying to hire people to come into the organization. That is, trying to find people, really, in the words of Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, trying to find the right fit for people and where people fit on the bus, if you read that book. So what I want you to do this week is take a look at those sites, and also in the text itself, there's a list of sites which I reference in the discussion question. And so the point is, do these sites really do their job in recruiting people to come work for government and nonprofit? Okay, so you remember this slide. I showed this slide in week 2, I believe. So what this slide tries to show is that around the year 2015, this data is, the percentage of people in each of these workforces that are in these age cohorts. And so just quickly for review, what we see is that if you go to the last row there where it says US workforce, we can take that, I guess, as the balance of our workforce on average. So really what you see there is kind of a balance across age cohorts, right? So meaning that people under 30, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, those are the prime working years, kind of dominate the percentage of people in that workforce, while people over 50 and then over 60 drop down in terms of percentages, meaning that people are working a normal work lifespan and then retiring, many in their 50s, but most in their 60s. But at any rate, the percentage of people who are in their 50s and 60s are smaller percentages than those in their prime work years. You know, just the opposite seems to pertain to the federal workforce. We have a very large percentage of people in the federal workforce who are in the 50 to 59 year bracket, and a slightly higher percentage in the over 60 bracket. So if you look at those two numbers, that's about 44, 45% of people in that workforce who are over 50 years old. Teachers who are public sector employees, this is public school teachers, not private school teachers, but teachers have kind of a similar problem, except that the bulk of teachers seem to be in that midlife zone. So the 30 to 50 age bracket, let's say, and then it kind of balances out with the rest of the workforce. The point is, at least at the federal workforce level, we have an imbalance. We have a large number of people who are, under normal circumstances, eligible to retire. So you recognize this from week 2 as well, this slide and the next slide, where we talk about this phenomena of generational differences and really if there are cohort differences between people, and you know, what are the causal factors in that. And so we reviewed this, you know, baby boomers being more accepting of organizational rules, Gen Xers being a little more results oriented, less comfortable with established procedures, and then millennials being much more comfortable with technology, and as a result, according to some people, have a shorter attention span, and that affects the way they do their jobs. And then this also from week 2, that what we have to look for really as HR managers are ways to actually hire and sustain a multi-generational workforce. So in other words, if you go back to that slide with the percentages on it, the goal should not be that everyone in the workforce is under 30 years old, just like the goal shouldn't be that everyone in the workplace is over 50 years old. Instead, we should desire normatively some kind of balance, right? Because we want to be able to continually replace workers as they age under normal circumstances. And so we have to look at these trends and see how these affect our ability to hire a multi-generational workforce. But my real question for this week is, why do people want to work for government, or who wants to work for government, or why don't people want to work for government? And I'm going to spend a few slides really I'm going to indulge myself, and I'm going to throw out some stereotypes out there that I've picked up over the years as a practitioner. And I want to throw these out there so that you can kind of think through these stereotypes and reason whether or not these affect our ability to hire succeeding generations to work for government and to work for a nonprofit. Okay, so here's a stereotype, a perception that it's all a bureaucracy, that any government work is done in this classical top-down bureaucratic structure. So in 80-50, I think, or maybe 80-90, you all read some of what Max Weber, the German sociologist, had to say in the early 1900s. And what Weber was talking about was his idea that bureaucracy was really the most effective way for enterprise, and he meant businesses and governments, to get its work done. So, people talk about Weberian bureaucracy. Weber was very pro-bureaucracy. He was advocating it. And the reason he was advocating is because it was better than what he said, what he claimed came before, which were organizations that were hallmarked by charismatic leadership or traditional leadership. He said bureaucracy was the result of having a legal system that enforced consistency in the way governments operated and businesses operated. But the bureaucracy of Weber, its hallmarks are a lot of rules, a lot of layers of supervision. And so over decades, we came to see that as ineffective, right? And in the 1990s, Osborne and Gabler wrote their famous book, Reinventing Government. And in that book, they claimed that most government work, and they were talking government at every level in their examples, most government work was done through what they called old public administration, which translated to a reliance on bureaucracy. Now, whether that's true or not is a different question, because if you read The Tools of Government by Salomon, which he wrote in about 2002, I think, he talks about how government at the federal level delivers a lot of its outputs through alternative means, through things like vouchers and contracts and grants, so that direct delivery of government services is actually something of the exception. Now, it is also true that some government agencies, especially at the federal level, really could be more akin to the classic bureaucracy. But the question is whether the classic bureaucracy is really an apt description of how all governments do all their work. It might be, but the question is whether that stereotype is true, and whether it's true that private sector enterprises are consistently better at delivering the same kinds of results for less money and in less time. So this is a stereotype, but it's a stereotype that may affect hiring. So here's a stereotype. It's been around a long time, that sloppiness and inexactness, I should say, are routinely accepted. So when I first came in the United States Air Force way back when, I'm not going to say the year, but it's a while ago. I mean, one of the first things I heard as a young officer, I heard from one of the old sergeants, I should say, who constantly told me that, this is good enough for government work. And so, I mean, he really meant it. So what did he mean? He meant that, look, we don't have to be precise. We don't have to be exact here. We can be close, and that's good enough. And so this is the stereotype, right? That government procurement projects are seen as always running over budget and always being delivered late. That unknowledgeable or apathetic managers are unable to detect errors made by equally unknowledgeable or willfully incompetent technicians. That often people in college who took the easy A courses end up as government workers or teachers, right? So we know stereotypically, we've heard this about K-12 teachers, haven't we? I doubt it's true, but we do hear this as a stereotype. And we also hear that in government work, it's nearly impossible to fire underperforming employees. So all these problems in this sloppiness and inexactness paradigm are simply compounded. And so we hear this complaint that the work itself is not engaging. And this actually, this stereotype relates to the idea of generational differences, cohort differences, right? Millennials and Gen Xers want engaging, exciting work, and in the government sector, we just can't provide that to them. That most of our work consists of, say, filling out forms. Maybe that's an old stereotype, but now we could say updating databases to produce reports that nobody reads. And the purpose of all this updating is to comply with a myriad of laws and regulations that these laws and regulations are designed to protect, I guess, someone or something, but it's not clear to the workers who that is, and it's not important to them anyway. And workers are discouraged from asking questions that might enable them to see the big picture, the mission of what they're doing. And workers are consistently encouraged to stay in their lane, that is, stick to your job, don't ask questions about somebody else's job, and don't make waves. And so by consequence, in government, according to this stereotype, there is almost no innovation. This stereotype as well gets to this issue of whether or not there are generational cohort differences. So we are told that millennials, for example, desire career development and mentorship on the part of those who are supervising them. But unfortunately, old supervisors and managers, if they're asked about this, their response is, well, look, hang around for a couple decades and maybe then you'll get promoted. And in the worst case scenario, these older supervisors and managers who got to their jobs only by sticking around a long time are really clueless about what a younger generation might want from the job. And we hear that technology is outdated, and in fact, there has been literature about some major government systems that still are running on computer assembly language, or on programs like Fortran. And we're talking about major pay systems, for example, the pay system that the DoD uses. And actually, you can research this, see that's true, that in spite of the fact that DoD is continually trying to update its pay system, it has had to pay bonuses to older programmers who understand Fortran, because that's the language that their system runs on. And so some of this maybe relates to issues of the government procurement system, that it's harder to replace legacy systems with more efficient software systems. But it's not just the technology. It's the fact that we don't actually understand what kinds of technology fixes we should be making. And then there's this one, and this is actually perhaps a little more current today, that government service is politicized. That anyone who works for government must be, by definition, loyal to the current, pick your executive, president, governor, or mayor. You could say perhaps school board president or someone else. That going to work for government means, hey, I get a chance to be loyal to this person. And so that might actually attract some people. It might actually turn a lot of other people away. We hear the complaint that government scientists, for example, can't really practice science. That is, practice unbiased research, because their findings are seen as partisan statements. Let alone lots of people who view their findings as partisan statements don't actually take the time to get into or understand their methodology. And that at the federal level anyway, government shutdowns unnecessarily punish the government workers just because Congress is unable to agree with itself and with the president, and this has happened many times, unable to agree to pass annual budgets in the manner that the law says they're supposed to be passed. And so finally, we have this stereotype that, public sector workers are the problem. So a few years ago, a lot of teachers and other public sector workers protested in the halls of the Wisconsin State House over the fact that Governor Walker was trying to make some cuts to teacher pensions. We often hear that K-12 teachers, they all have tenure. They can't get fired, meaning basically that public education is substandard, right? Well, university professors are worse, right? They gain tenure, and then they teach about 6 hours a week, and they spend the rest of their time drinking scotch and smoking pipes. It's not really true, but it's a stereotype that's out there. City road crews have 8 workers on the job, 1 of whom is working, 7 of whom are watching. And all of these people, without exception, have some kind of lucrative pension plan that taxpayers must subsidize. And these same taxpayers really don't have anything close to that for their golden years. And so I guess the question is, are these perceptions true? And if they're fully true, or they're even partly true, how do these affect hiring? How do they affect our ability to hire people to work for government? And are the recruiting and hiring systems we have part of the problem? And that leads me to our discussion question. So see, I told you this was going to be a short lecture, and I'm in at less than 20 minutes. But here is our discussion question for this week. And what I really want you to do with this, you could be reading this, what I really want you to do with this question is, based on the reading I give you, I want you to look at these websites that are used, really. These are real websites to hire people into government work, and then there's some nonprofit ones as well. And I want you to state an opinion, an extended opinion, as to whether you believe these websites are actually effective at doing their job. And that is, really, their job is hiring people who are the right people to hire into government and nonprofit positions. So that's it. Spend some time with the text and spend some time with those websites, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you.